Hi, and thank you for joining us for session 4 of a 4-part professional development series. Today we'll be focusing on unit design and next generation science assessments. The other sessions in the series are available on demand. Session 1 focuses on integrating reading and Socratic dialogue. Session 2, planning as student scientists and engineers. Session 3, experimenting and prototyping in the classroom. And again, the session 4 on unit design and next generation science assessments. This is a chronological series in the sense that it's following the progression of both the teachers and students' experience from the beginning through the end of a unit, specifically a unit that looks at science or engineering from the perspective of a scientist and engineer, where the students are being scientists and engineers. So in the case of KnowAtom curriculum, we've been following the progression from nonfiction reading all the way through student experimentation, lab planning, and carrying out that lab. Today we'll see how those labs get wrapped up and how we transition from experimentation to discussion. We'll go a little further to talk about assessments. We did cover some of this in the previous session as we were wrapping up, but we'll take another look at that. And then also a look at the KnowAtom resources that you have, specifically the students' readers, what's in the teacher binder, and also the online resources that KnowAtom Interactive that you will use your username and password for if your district is contracted with KnowAtom, and also KnowAtom.com resources/resources, where you can find a lot more information about next generation science standards and everything from implementation strategies to leadership and sort of the change management of implementing the next generation science standards. So let's jump right in here to transitioning from experimentation to discussion with a thought about materials management in terms of how we wrap this up. So as students are carrying out their lab plans, so they've planned these investigations, the next step really is to begin wrapping up materials. So students are going to be working in pairs. You're going to be facilitating that environment, sort of walking about, checking in. Students are going to be coming up to you for those checkpoints that we had discussed earlier on. But while these investigations are being carried out, they're really in stage 7 of either the scientific method or the engineering design process, where they're gathering data through their testing. Now, the data analysis happens once they put their materials back. So if you remember, we had talked about that classroom environment as being best managed where students are planning their investigations at their seats, checking in with the teacher in the center, and then as they meet the different milestones, they are ready to carry out their plan at stage 7, or sort of stage 6, depending, stage 5, stage 6 in engineering. And then what happens is that plan gets carried out by either building the prototype and testing and gathering the data, or actually bringing the experimental materials together, carrying out the experiment and gathering the data at the student seats. Once that's done, once the data is gathered, then the students should know, and this is really the teacher's job to communicate the expectation that when they're done that they'll return unused materials or whatever would be reused back to the stations where they got it. So that's where you see around the edge of the room, clean up their spot, and then actually go into analyzing the data. So you have raw data in a data table. Analysis would be something like finding the mean, median, mode, the difference in an average. Those sort of calculations start to happen after. So students really have to consider, what does this data mean? So that's where the analysis comes in. They have to decide, what are we going to do? Take an average? Are we going to take 2 averages and find the difference of them? That's the sort of thing that they're going to do. And that's part of forming a conclusion. Okay, so the data analysis sort of is this little gray area that's really part of the conclusion, but it happens after gathering data. Okay, after that data is gathered, after the experimenting or prototyping, or the prototype test or the experiment has been carried out. Okay, so those students in this little cartoon here, they have materials still in front of them, so they would still be gathering data at this phase. Those materials go away once they get into building this conclusion. And so or coming to a conclusion. So a student's lab at that phase, this particular lab is complete because you see that it has refine or replicate. This is the conclusion portion, and this is an engineering lab. Okay, there's no materials with students at that point. The data tables, you'll note in your KnowAtom materials, we do give copy masters for data tables, and the reason that we do that is to save students time on learning in terms of there's very little value in creating little square boxes, and so if we can provide that as an early measure, then students can modify the labels, they can modify the units, they can add on to it, but they at least have a piece that from a time on learning perspective gets them a little further down the road. Now, as you get into January and February and further in the year, you're going to see that students really understand the practices and processes well and can apply them. So those copy masters may be something that you don't hand out. You may actually begin training students, just like in math, we're going to need to create data tables. The conventions are going to be all the same that you would see in the copy master, titles, appropriate column and row labels with units and so on noted, but it's just not a low-hanging fruit to sort of throw everything at the students at once at the beginning of the year. So that may be sort of a strategy moving forward. But back to the conclusions here. In terms of the context of science, if you're using the scientific process or what we call the scientific method, or it's slightly different than what you would see in the context of engineering, where students are using the engineering design process. Okay, so in the context of science, the basic, and I don't want to call this a formula for a conclusion, but the focus areas and what a conclusion must contain for science is first and foremost restating the hypothesis. Second of all, it needs to include a claim about that hypothesis. So if the hypothesis was that can carry more cargo in saltier seas, that is either true or false or inconclusive as a result of the data that was gathered in the experiment. Okay, because remember, the experiment tests the hypothesis. The experiment's job is to gather data so that we can reflect back on that hypothesis and determine, as a result of testing in the data, whether or not the hypothesis is true or false. Remember, it's a statement. Now, inconclusive comes into play here because there may be human error, or we may have collected data that wasn't particularly useful in the sense that it wasn't the right type of data to collect. There may have been human error. There's a lot of different things that can get involved that could yield an inconclusive result. Now, I'm saying true, false, or inconclusive. Some people prefer to say supported or not supported or inconclusive. Now, this is an area of debate. In the case of the investigation, it's either true or false, but in the macro sense, science is never really once and done. We're always sort of verifying and building a body of knowledge around a particular hypothesis until it's essentially regarded as a law. So that's where people sort of like to say at times supported and not supported versus true or false. When you think of the world of a first or second grade student or even a middle school student, to be able to understand the relationship between the claim and the hypothesis as being true or false can often be helpful in sort of removing ambiguity. And that really comes into play in the next piece of a conclusion, which is the key data that supports that claim. So if you can consider that hypothesis, boats float better in saltier waters, if that is true, we carry out an experiment where we, put a boat in water and we load it down with cargo, and we observe how much cargo it can safely carry in ocean water that is somewhat saline and one that is, much more salty than that. By gathering that data, we need to analyze it in such a way that we can come to some key data that will support the claim that we make. So if we claim that boats do float better in saltier water, or in fact a boat can carry more cargo in saltier water, that our hypothesis was true, a boat can carry more cargo in saltier water, we better have some data to back that up. We can't say according to the data that we gathered in our experiment. That's not, we won't accept that. So we would need to say something like, over the course of 3 trials where we compared the amount of cargo that a ship can carry in medium salinity water to high salinity, to the same boat in high salinity water, we found that the boat, when placed in high salinity water, could carry 20% more cargo than in the less salty water. That's one way of saying it. Another way we could say it would be, and this again depends on the kind of data that's gathered, we might say something like, and again, just for the sake of not getting tongue-tied, let's say we were comparing fresh water to salt water. We could say something like, the boat, over the course of 3 trials, we found that a boat placed in salt water could carry 50,000 pounds more cargo than it could in fresh water. Or it could carry 75 more marbles in salt water than it could in fresh water. So something like that. So I'm coming down to trying to get to one data point that's a comparison of the two. And really we want to look at a difference of averages, because to say 75 more marbles, I don't know what that really means. If we literally tested, we did one trial where we placed the boat in fresh water and then we placed the boat in salt water and that was it, then to say 75 more marbles makes sense in that context. But if we did 3 trials to say 75 more marbles, adding the 5 extra to the 20 extra to the 50 extra and saying 75 more, it's illogical. So this is a point where we would really kind of prosecute the data, prosecute the conclusion during a debrief, or even ideally, as students are wrapping up, finishing their experiment, they're creating their conclusion. So remember, some students are going to be working on their conclusions potentially while others are still finishing their experiments, gathering their data, and just getting into their conclusion. What you should do in that case is create a checkpoint where those early students are coming up to you with their conclusion, and you're going to ask them these kinds of questions. And so they're going to read their conclusion to you, and you're going to say, did I hear the hypothesis in there? What was the hypothesis? And they're going to say, oh, no, I didn't have it. So you're going to send them back to fix it. Or they're going to restate their hypothesis, and they're going to have not made a claim. So you're going to have to send them back for that. And then they're going to come back up, and they're going to have their hypothesis and their claim. And again, this is written as a bit of a narrative. So it's 3 to 8 sentences. It depends on the grade level or so. They're going to come back, and their data is going to just be listing out the entire data table. You're going to say in trial 1 it held 10 marbles, in trial 2 it held 7 marbles, in trial 3, and it's nonsensical. The students can't, that is not key data to support the claim. Or they're going to come up and say, because my data, because it said so in the data table, according to the data table, they're going to make statements like that. All not acceptable. They need to come back with specific data that supports their claim. So they might say, if they haven't been taught how to do an average yet, they may say something like, the 4 observations for freshwater were, ranged from 6 to 10 marbles in each trial, while the amount of cargo that was carried in saltwater ranged from 25 to 35, and that's a difference of, at least, and again, I'm not remembering the numbers I just gave you, but essentially, that's a difference of at least 10 marbles between saltwater and freshwater. So we can, clearly say that saltwater enables boats to carry more cargo than fresh water. Something like that, okay? It's because, again, remember, the focus here is not only the content, it's not only the context, it's those practices, which is precision. It's creating an argument, so it has to be persuasive. It is restating what's known, but also what's learned. And it's in the context of this process as well, because we are basically, this is an investigation. Now for engineering, it's very similar, that similar kind of mode, but because we're dealing with a problem, it helps to tweak it a little bit this way. So in essence, the formula for a conclusion in engineering is to restate the problem and then describe the solution. So if the problem was getting across a river, the solution chosen might have been some kind of, catapult, I don't know, and then a claim, and RR stands for either revise or replicate. So, we would recommend revising it based on, and that's where the key data comes in. Okay, the key data that supports the claim. We would recommend revising it based on the data that we gathered, which showed that the cargo got across the river. However, we were able to observe times the cargo was destroyed. It was smashed or heavily damaged or something like that. So that would be an example of, a combination of quantitative and qualitative data. So quantitative would be all 10 pieces of cargo made it across the river as a result of being thrown by the catapult in each of 5 trials. However, the cargo was damaged. So the cargo being damaged, qualitative. It's really hard to say in a quantitative sense what damage really means. So it's qualitative, but quantitative in the sense of we know that all 10, 100% got across. Okay, so that's still key data. Generally, key data, in whether it's science or engineering, in these types of experiments in this curriculum, you're going to find we're talking about less than 3 data points. Okay, now this is an example of a student's engineering conclusion, whether they would refine or replicate, and they might say something like, we successfully engineered a prototype water filtration device that filtered most of the pollutants and sediments from the storm water runoff. Our final prototype produced B-grade water, but was over the target budget by 30 cents. Our early prototypes each produced C-grade water quality because they used large and medium pore materials, which kept the cost low, but did not filter enough pollutants from the water. This is, probably middle school level here. Our final design produced purer water because we used small pore materials and layered them above and below a large pore material. Based on the data, we would not recommend, so there's a claim, our third prototype for replication until the cost to produce the filter was lower. This could be done by layering more medium pore materials that are less expensive in place of high cost small pore materials. Now, that would definitely meet the requirements. Well, actually, it wouldn't, and I'm going to explain a little bit why. So remember, we're looking for them to restate the problem, describe the prototype solution, make a claim, whether they would revise or replicate, and give key data that supports the claim. Now, restating the problem is it's a little bit of a gray area. Okay, it really helps to frame the conclusion in terms of argumentation and as a persuasive writing piece, which is something we always want to keep in mind. So I would have liked to see that student reframe the problem, or to frame the problem by restating it in essence. But I don't like some of the things about this conclusion. One is we successfully engineered a prototype water filtration device. Successfully is sort of a qualitative judgment. I would have liked to hear that, really kind of jump into it, that the we engineered a prototype water filtration device that was able to produce B-grade water. That's what I'd be looking, because B-grade water is something we can look up in the context of the experiment. There's obviously a gradient here, and that's where framing by describing the problem would have helped, because we would have understood that there are 3 grades of water potentially here. Let's say A, B, and C. We need a filtration device that's going to be able to produce at least B-grade water. Okay, and that there's obviously also a cost target which by restating the problem would have helped us understand that. And the other thing I didn't really like here was the fact that we said it was successful, but yet it was over budget. It's not really successful if it's over budget. And again, so to make a qualitative judgment this way is a little bit something that, again, early in the year, as students are getting used to this sort of way of writing, you don't want to kind of cut them down at the knees. You know, you're going to be a little bit more permissive of wordy conclusions like this, but as you get into January, February, March, this is the kind of stuff you're going to be weeding out. You say, well, successfully, that sounds kind of qualitative. What do you mean by successful? It was over budget. You're right. Can you go back and tighten that up? Help me really understand what you mean by successful. Also, you're saying B-grade water. If you're really being persuasive, how do I know what B-grade water is? Can you help frame that? How many grades of water are there? Does it go from A to Z? What can you tell me about this? The next thing is it was over budget by 30 cents. Nothing says anything about what the total budget was. So 30 cents may be really nothing, but if you only had 50 cents, it's a whole lot. Again, the problem's not really restated, so I don't understand as the reader or as the person who's in essence is on the line to be persuaded. If this is a water filter for people in rural areas that have virtually no income, you know, 50 cents might be a lot, or sorry, 30 cents might be a lot. If this is for, you know, an office building in Manhattan, 30 cents might be relatively, you know, nothing. So who knows? Also, early prototypes doesn't really help me. Early, what does that mean? Early in the morning, early 1 out of 10, the first 5 out of 10, I don't know. Early, not a particularly useful word here. And I put this red line in because this is actually where I feel like I start to pay attention, because this first bit is really qualitative stuff that almost doesn't matter. So where they start to talk about our final design produced purer water than what? Purer than what? Because we used small pore materials and layered them above and below a large pore material. Okay, that's helpful to know. Based on the data, and again, this is like not something I really like, based on the data, it's not specific, we would not recommend, so there's the recommendation, that's good, our third prototype for replication until the cost to produce the filter was lower. And actually, how much lower? At least 30 cents lower, because we needed to be on budget, right? So you could see, I would send him back to fix a whole lot of things here. And you can actually see, this is a prime example of where ELA technical writing practices for science in the context of Common Core state standards really come alive. Okay, so this is where you want to kind of drill in and take the language apart. And you can do this on the fly, just as I'm doing with you. If you don't have any kids that are ready with their conclusions, and this is the first guy that's come up to you, first team, you can really do a lot of work with them while you're waiting for others and send them back to work on it. Okay, this is like where you push back and ask those questions, causes their thinking. They're going to come back to you, and this is the, you know, back and forth. Okay, almost like a peer review. Okay. So now let's say that you've done that with a few teams. The rest of them are all finished up. Okay, you don't have time to do this with everybody in this case, but you're gonna be able to get this over the course of a few labs. Okay, different students are going to get done different labs at different times. Okay, so what you want to do is try to get to some of those labs that you haven't had a chance to talk to the students. Okay, and you kind of launch back into a Socratic dialogue. So all the materials are away now, the kids have conclusions, and you might jump into it and ask, hey, was your team able to produce a B-grade water on budget, or a B-grade water filter on budget? And some kids are going to say yes and no and maybe. Say, okay, well, how about, you know, team 2? Would you share your conclusion? So now they share their conclusion, but before they really get into it, it's important that everybody else in the class understands the expectations that if we're doing engineering at this point, they are listening for these key areas, that they've restated their problem, described a prototype solution, they've made a claim, and the data. And so team 2 reads their conclusion, and then you go back and say, hey, did we hear the problem restated? What was the problem? And the other students, not team 2, should be able to pick out and say, yeah, this is what they said. Okay, did we hear what the prototype solution that they've proposed is. Yeah, what is it? And some that you'll be able to, and then they may say, and then you may say something like, did they make a claim? Yes. And then you start to get into the key data. Was there key data? Yes. And then the bigger questions come in. Was it persuasive? Are you persuaded? Does the evidence that you gathered, did you share this prototype solution, this approach, in your team? Yes, no, maybe. Okay. The yes folks, did your conclusion match with theirs when you tried this? Why or why? Yes or no? Why or why not? Do you agree based on your approach? And you're going to get yes, no's, and maybes. And that's where kids start to share, well, we did this, and we got a different result. Or we did the same thing, and we got a different result. Well, if we did the same thing and got a different result, now we have something interesting, right? If you do the two of the same things and you get different results, then that means that most likely there's some human error in there. Or somebody, in fact, somebody may not have followed the diagram of their prototype or the approach. Okay, they may have done something differently. So we just start to dig into the documentation. So it actually becomes kind of another investigation. So that's how this debrief sort of happens around the conclusions. The next thing you can say is, was it persuasive, yes or no? Oh, yeah, no. Why? Okay, you're saying no. Why? What could have made this more persuasive? And the students will say stuff like, well, you know, the data that they used really didn't support the hypothesis. Or I would have liked to see different kind of data. I would have liked to see something like this. In our study, we looked at this kind of data. Here's why. We thought if we would have used data like they did, that it wouldn't have been as persuasive because we noticed X, Y, Z. See, that's where the real connections and real analysis comes out. And now you can take that further after you've had some of this discussion. So basically, as a teacher now, you know the students have come up to you, what they've done. You've had students who didn't come up to you share out, and they've also gotten, everybody's had a chance to engage in peer review, some as the receivers, some as the givers. Now, you can kind of harken back to the big concepts of the unit and say, well, what does this mean in the context of, let's say, you know, again, fictitious, what does this mean in the context, or what are the challenges that we're seeing in the context of creating water filtration that's both affordable and accessible for some of the environments that we read about in our student reader? What were some of those environments? Oh, we read about, you know, this community or that community, this instance when there's, you know, torrential rains and it impacts water systems and so on and so forth. Okay, well, what do we think about the budgets? You know, is something like this, the budget that we're talking about, something that would be feasible for those people? So you see, you go right back into a Socratic dialogue at this point. And that is really key because it's keeping the students on their toes. You're thinking alongside them, but what you're thinking is you're thinking about you're forcing their thinking with your questions, okay? And you're forcing them to connect now the experience and their results to each other and back to the content and the context of this unit. And some of our early assumptions perhaps now have been dispelled, or we view these situations a little bit differently. And you can even connect to earlier units as well in this. You know, it's going to happen naturally. And you can then jump forward and say, well, you know, now that we've talked about this, if I said that we're going to talk about something related to life science, how do you think something like water filtration and the cost of water filtration might be something that's important in the context of living organisms? And just get the students brainstorming. And now, you know, you're basically foreshadowing your next lesson or unit here. And you can, you know, start to get into that reading if you want, if that's, you know, your time allows. You might want to, you know, throw up some, you know, that word splash, the empty concept map from the on KnowAtom Interactive online, and just say, you know, can you see any of these concepts that might connect? We're going to get into this further next time. And then next time when you come back together, you jump back into the reading, transition to your Socratic dialogue, go into the planning or the activities, and so you can see how this becomes a rinse and repeat. So really, really important. That's how you create rigorous, high quality, authentic science and engineering environment in the context of next generation, really a next generation environment in the context of these new next generation science standards. Okay, it's, again, you can see I'm not doing the drill and kill. There is an element of drill here, but it's drilling for thinking. Okay, you're looking to strike gold by asking students questions and causing them to have to give you higher order responses. Okay, let's take a look at the next bit here, formative and summative assessment. So just like we're talking about that dialogue is really formative and summative. It's just happening in real time, and it's not what we normally think of as an assessment and being on paper or, you know, typing on some computer. It's actually a public assessment, and that's really what it is to do, you know, scientific argumentation, presenting ideas and having this sort of peer discussion. So it's summing up what students found, how they are using vocabulary, how well they have mastered the practices, how well they've mastered the processes, and how well they, I mean, just like the practice in the sense of argumentation. It's summing that up in the moment in a very dynamic and authentic way, and it's also helping you as the educator to inform your instruction, because you're going to see how the students perform in that environment. You're actually creating another environment for performance. You're putting performance expectations out there. Students have to perform the expectation. So, and they're reporting back on that essentially. So that's going to inform where you go from there. You're going to expose weaknesses in both content and practice knowledge and process knowledge, and also cross-cutting concepts that you can carry forward as focus correction areas in your next lesson or unit. It doesn't mean you stop everything and you do, you know, pre-teaching and have the students mirror it all back to you. Now, if students don't understand how to use a tool properly, you might do a little mini lesson on that and show them, but that's more an exception to the rule. Okay? What you're going to do is you're going to, if you see that students perhaps have a misconception, for instance, it comes up in the course of discussion that students think that atoms are alive. You might create a discussion around the difference between living and non-living things and highlight that as part of this life science unit that's coming up. You might ask the question, are atoms living or non-living? And when students are divided, that gives you a perfect entryway into talking about the characteristics of life versus things that are non-living. And that will dispel that myth, okay, and make sure that it's dispelled, okay? So that's an example of how that dialogue informs instruction moving forward. Same thing with practices and processes. If you see that students are not hitting those points that they need to hit in different areas and forming different aspects of the process appropriately, or let's say the conclusion, you can create focus correction areas around that. And even differentiating instruction. Some students are their writing skills are going to be much, much more developed than others. So you know you can push those students further, like I was doing earlier when I had this example. I would push much, much further with students. This overall is fine, but it's not really, you know, it's proficient level work. It's not really beyond that. And so you can push a little bit and get much, much better quality, and not only be helping the student in the context of science and their understanding of the practices and processes, but actually be helping them in an ELA context as well. So it's really, really important stuff here. Okay. Other assessments we have talked about are things like the vocabulary and concept assessments. Okay. So this is obviously the lab assessment. There's actually another category here which I didn't have listed. In that category, okay, let's, I guess, maybe just look at this for now. So the lesson assessments are the labs, first and foremost, and then student activities. So we've talked sort of ad nauseum here about labs. This is an engineering lab. There would be a science lab equivalent, right, following the scientific process. A student activity is something that either breaks out or sort of chunks some components of one of those processes where students are, again, having to demonstrate their practice skills. This is an example, basically breaking out a graphing activity, which really focuses on the analysis and methods of scientific diagramming of data. Okay, so this is looking at salmon populations and dam activity on specific rivers. And in this particular unit, student groups are all working on different rivers. They're using practices and aspects of processes to go through, do some analysis, graph, and then actually analyze, follow some procedure as well. It's not a full-blown lab. They aren't carrying out all the planning, but they are going to carry out aspects of a lab and then perhaps form conclusions. Now, what you can do is when you think about that sort of continuum from nonfiction reading to Socratic dialogue, where you would have students planning a lab investigation, that's where the activity gets plugged in instead. And then the same thing happens. After that lab is carried out, you would do a debrief in a Socratic sense like we just discussed. Instead of debriefing on a full lab like this, you may be debriefing on the conclusion from an activity. So the conclusion may still look like this, and you're looking for the same pieces. It's just as the result of whatever was carried out in the activity. Okay, and the curriculum will prompt you for all of this, sort of guide you. So you're not going to, there's not a lot of guesswork here in terms of, wait a minute, should they be like using the process or the practice? So it's all laid out for you. So it's happening in the context of the activity, and what you're going to have to do is you're going to have to decide, obviously, how long, but what areas you really want to probe into in that debrief, which also sort of takes the context of Socratic dialogue, okay, that we had discussed earlier. Those labs and those activities are the core of the program. You cannot skip these whatsoever. You can't skip activities and or labs, okay? Now, things that you can skip, and really, professional judgment here, are the more summative assessments in a sense, but really all these things are formative because they get carried forward. Everything is scaffolding throughout the year. So the intentional articulation of units is done so that the vocabulary has relevance beyond a single lesson or a single unit into future units. But let's just take a quick look here. So this is an example from the back of your unit, teacher's unit, where there's a unit. For this case, it's grade 7, unit 7 vocabulary check. This is an assessment that you can do and send home as homework, ticket to leave, entrance activity, something like that. It's summative. It's summing up how students understand, if they understand, do they know the vocabulary words, their definitions? Can they match the vocabulary word to their definitions? Now, this usage of vocabulary is consistent with the usage of the vocabulary in the student reading. Okay, so it has that relationship. It's also consistent with the way that it's used in your teacher background. So as you've been reading your teacher background, you're getting the same content at an adult's level that they're getting at a 7th grade level, more broken down for them. Okay, so vocabulary checks are not meant to sort of stop the whole show and spend several days on vocabulary here. This is intended to be something that you can sort of fit in where you can fit in, but again, not to disrupt or remove in any way those labs or those activities. These must happen. Otherwise, the students are not going to master the practices and processes. They're not going to master the connection to the content the way they need to. Okay? The next type of assessment that you'll find at the back of your unit is the concept check. Now, these concept checks require students to engage in higher order thinking, which, the vocab assessments really aren't higher order thinking. They are requiring students to remember, at most apply, okay, and understand what the vocabulary is. That's lower order thinking. The concept checks require higher order thinking because we are going to ask about those potentially vocab words and the underlying standards, the essence of those underlying standards in an entirely unfamiliar context. And we're using really inquiry-based test language here, so that again, students are going to become familiar with this method of inquiry testing as a result of engaging in concept checks. However, I would bet large sums of money that, especially in an implementation year, that students who engage in concept checks at the beginning of the year are going to fail them almost without question. And the reason is that most traditional classrooms have never taught students to approach sort of these, reading in a context of, especially nonfiction science or scientific reading, with their higher order thinking skills. Most traditional classrooms have taught students to search for a fact, match it up, and search for the, basically find the fact and match the answer kind of model. And that's not possible in these types of questions. What these types of questions require is analysis of the question and potentially text features as part of that question to then form or create some, or analyze, create an answer in the case of an open response like you see over here, or to evaluate, make a judgment, analyze the data in the context to form an answer or select an answer from the choices available. Okay, so that's very different. And so don't look at these and say, well, we never taught them about 1989 when all the trees disappeared. That's on purpose. We want to see if students can use what they've learned from this unit in relation to the changes in populations and shocks to systems, to apply those practice and process skills plus what the content that they have learned about environments and changes in environments, those disciplinary core ideas, that more dynamic content, to look at a specific, unique but different context and apply it, okay, and synthesize when it comes to these open response style questions. We're going to ask multiple different contexts. We're going to ask multiple different styles of questions, and we might even inject new information later on so that students have to challenge their own assumptions from earlier in that question, one of their earlier questions, answers to one of the earlier questions. So that's really the next generation model of assessment. And I think as you see these next generation assessments roll out, and in places like Ohio and Northeast states that use NECAP assessments, and some others as well, other states, and even internationally in things like the PISA assessment from the OECD, this is the type of questioning that we see. When you have inquiry standards and performance expectations, which I would, first of all, the next generation science standards are performance expectations, they're not standards. It's sort of a, I guess, one of those paradoxes in the naming of next generation science standards, but they are what I would call an inquiry standard. They are an inquiry methodology, really. And so when you have an inquiry standard, you have to assess inquiry. And so that's really what the practices are all about, inquiry. So they are going to have to be, this is one of the likely ways that they're going to do it, is in a model like this that follows existing inquiry test methods. And states like Ohio are already saying, and they've published, that they are modeling their testing for science after the performance testing that they've seen in PARC, the PARC model. And again, not to keep bringing up PARC, but you can see in PARC assessments where they are actually asking students to engage in things like this. Showing the student a picture, giving them a scenario, and then asking them questions about it. Okay, can they source information from a text? And can they synthesize it with that information, their own opinion, perhaps, about it? Okay, so keep that in mind. The last bit of what I would like to discuss with you before we wrap up this session in the series is a little bit about the unit design and next generation science standards and the KnowAtom resources you have available. So the KnowAtom resources you have available is first and foremost curriculum. The curriculum is the backbone. What you see pictured there is the teacher's curriculum binders, okay? This is a paper version. Now, the curriculum, everything that is in that binder is also available online. And I'm going to show you how to find that in a moment. The teacher's unit, everything that's in that binder, the lessons, the assessments, any kind of copy masters, but also the visuals. The visuals are not in the binders. We do not put the visuals in print. Okay, they're only available electronically. So that's available online. Students' readers are available online. The student reader is not a part of the binder. Okay, the student reader comes in the materials, and that's what you see down in the bottom right. So what you see down in the bottom right is materials for a teacher, probably a couple teachers for a year. Or maybe two teachers for an implementation year where they would have durables and consumables. The student reader is in there. Now, just like I mentioned, there are consumables and durables. When you get your materials from KnowAtom, they're going to come to you directly to your school. They're going to have your name on it, your class number, and they're going to, each package is going to be only for one unit. So some units that have more materials than others are perhaps in 2 packages or 3 packages. It will say on the box, box 1 of 2 or 1 of 3. Okay, that means that there's 2 more or 3 more you need to go find. So you'll find 2 of 3 and 3 of 3, and now you have all your boxes. Okay, so we deliver them to the school. Now, they're either delivered by common carrier or freight or so on. Once they get to your school door, somebody in the school is going to deliver it from that point to your classroom. So it's important to know that that can be a challenge. They have to somehow get from the door to the classroom. That's an opportunity for things to be broken, to be lost, or to be stored on a radiator or crushed or something like this. So if you know you have materials coming, it's important that you know when and you know who is going to be responsible for getting them from point A to point B. If you have students moving boxes, it's very important that you let students know how to appropriately handle the materials. And in fact, you may want more than one student. The last thing you want is your materials rolling down the stairs, okay? Because again, this is science material. Instruments are sensitive. We do our best to pack them for shipping. If you do have materials that for whatever reason arrive damaged or are damaged in a process, please let us know right away. We'll do our best to replace them, and we'll show you how to do that in 1 second. So inside that box, if it's marked consumables, the only thing that's in there is consumables. Now the reading material is considered consumable, so you can do close readings, highlight, and so on. If it's labeled with durables, that means that it's most likely your first year or you're in a new classroom. And so the consumables are packaged with the durables. A durable would be something like a microscope or something like a digital scale or an infrared thermometer. Okay. So your job is to use all of this, but then those durable materials, they don't get consumed, so you're going to have to store these somehow. Like you see, these are in cardboard boxes because in order to keep things affordable, most affordable for schools, and also most appropriate, what we do is we package them in cardboard boxes and cartons. And then those durable materials, they belong with Unit 1, will fit on a shelf or in a small cubby, whatever type of arrangement works best for you in the classroom, which we do not provide shelves for your classroom. But you can find something that fits best, and we do let school leadership know that that's something that they should account for some small bit of budget to be able to reimburse teachers or whomever is doing the organizational bit in the classroom. But generally, one cabinet is enough because things are spread out over all the different units. Okay, so that's what's in materials. In case you get all of your cartons, you're going to get in tiered shipments. You're going to get 3 or 4 units at once. So you're going to see 3 or 4 of these packages at once. Potentially, one will have a few extra. Do not take everything out of the box, mix it together with the other things, and stick it on a shelf. Some people will do that, and you risk being very frustrated The reason that you're very frustrated is that you're going to have to go back and try to figure out what material is for what unit. Okay, and most likely students will use more than you have, and they'll get into your other materials for other units or start to mix things together in such a way that you get further down the road and don't have what you need or can't find it. Okay, so keeping things in their boxes, keeping them on shelves, and sort of organizing it this way is a nice little way to kind of compartmentalize the materials so that it's easiest for you. In terms of professional development, each district's professional development is sort of crafted individually, and that's in consultation with district leadership to try to look at past professional development that's gone on in the district, and also where everyone is at in the moment. So in terms of almost developmentally, where is science at this grade level in this building at this time, and where do we need to look and go in order to get it where it needs to be, where we all hope it will be by the end of the year, and kind of craft an approach. So that type of professional development typically happens in person. It'll happen at the beginning of the year, and then with subsequent check-ins in person later on through the year. The other form of professional development, which you can access anytime free, is embedded in online resources, but also on the resources section of KnowAtom's website, and I'm going to show you that in a second. That's all video on demand, much like this, so you can go through and actually sort of fast forward, and you can watch the whole video through and then fast forward to the parts that you need to either get some reinforcement or see that again. And again, it's something you can see over and over in any time. So those resources are available. And the purpose of everything is really that it all links up so that that classroom learning, that STEM learning environment, can be not only next generation aligned, but authentic and something that's student-centered and focused on higher order thinking skills, the creative, evaluative, and analytical thinking skills, and building those in students in a way that you see down here in the bottom left. So the scope and sequence, and I'm just putting a screenshot up here, is important. You're doing all your units in that order that's specified by their number. And it's going to scaffold not only through the year, sort of horizontally aligned, but also vertically. So as you go from one grade level to the next, and all the way really from kindergarten and first grade on up. So I could throw another screenshot up of here, first grade through fifth grade, and it's going to flow right through. And that's great because this, from the student's perspective, the practices, the processes are all consistent. The vocabulary is building. And the meanings, sort of the fundamental meaning isn't shifting, but the context is evolving. And so students get a very clear, almost network is the way I would describe it, understanding that when they see a context, they immediately have the skills to be able to answer questions and solve problems within it and begin analyzing it very critically, and even in a novel context. But on the flip side, they can look at something that's new and begin mapping it back to prior experiences and really understand sort of where it fits in the larger context of science and engineering, which is, I think, perhaps the, between critical thinking and that, what I just described, is really the most powerful part of this program. Okay? So if you go to KnowAtom.com, as a KnowAtom customer, you can click on the customer login and you are going to come to our KnowAtom Interactive. Okay? And that's going to look like this. So you come to KnowAtom Interactive, it's going to say your name, you're going to see logout. Okay, so that's you, you're in, and you're going to see a couple things. One, contact us on live materials. Contact us if you have a question, a concern, a need, whatever. And this will take you to a place where you can grab our phone number, write us a letter if you want, or you can submit something basically by an email request, and you'll get a response. Typically 24 hours to 48 hours is really the window, oftentimes same day. Live materials request is how you get your live materials. So depending on your grade level, most grade levels have at least one live material which need to be requested online. We require 2 weeks advance notice. And when you click on that form, it's going to pop up and have all the things that you need to say in order for us to have all the information we need to send you what you need. You don't need credit cards. It's going to reconcile against the district account. But what you are going to do is need to give us that 2 week window or more. If you know where you're going to be next month for sure, give us the notice now. You'll get a confirmation email. We only ship out on Mondays, and the purpose of that is to make sure that it arrives to you anywhere in the US before the weekend. Please let, just like when you have packages coming from KnowAtom, please let your office or the people who deliver things to your room know, hey, I got some live materials coming. Don't leave them on the radiator. Don't leave them all closed up over the weekend. Okay? Down below, you see the grade levels. Now, you're not, depending on what grade levels your district is contracted for, you won't see all of these. If you're only contracted for 6 through 8, you're only going to see 6 through 8. Okay? Or you may see one of the others, but you click on it and it just says, access denied. That's because your district doesn't have that curriculum in place. When you click, let's say you're a 6th grade teacher and that's what your district's using, click on grade 6, click. What you're going to see is something like this pop up. Cover pages are the cover pages from your binder. It's basically a little mini professional development that you can read, helps you kind of understand how to parse units, the scope and sequences in there, all of that, okay, pacing guide. But you have the pacing guide broken out here, some safety stuff, PD video access right there, and then down below you have the units themselves. So maybe it's September, I'm getting into my first unit, click Unit 1, and this is what you're going to see, okay? This is the file for the teacher curriculum unit, the file for the student reader, and then what you're going to see is lesson 1 specific stuff. Visuals, okay, a video that might be helpful, blank data table. Now, when you see things like videos, you're not required to use these. There's something that you might want to use as part of a transition or an activator. Before you launch into that reading, you might want to show 10 minutes of this video. Okay, they're high-quality videos that we have found that we think would be useful in this context, given what we're talking about, the context of the unit. Now, if you find a broken link, please report it to us. When it comes to things like these embedded resources, they are embedded and linked to on third-party sites. So it is possible that that link can change and we may not know about it. We only know if you report it, and then we'll fix it. The other thing is view the video. Depending on your grade level and your particular community's focus and background, you may want to show parts and not other parts. And again, any advertising that may be part of that, again, is beyond our control. So again, we always recommend previewing. The other things that you'll notice here, there's live materials involved, so we've again tried to remind you with a link. And we've also have all of the assessments that are in your teacher binder are also down here specific to this unit. Again, we're trying to emphasize these are optional assessments because they're the vocab concept check. And also, not so much an assessment, but it can be used as an assessment, is the blank concept map visual, okay? And that's like a word splash, which you can use with the kids to, throw it up there, ask them, hey, what's connected, who can tell us what's connected and how? Let them take turns, okay? Great transition, or a link to the next unit and some additional resources on the side, simulations, and also some other more full-length videos. Great, so that's your online, again, these are your online resources you can access through KnowAtom.com up here. There's another little piece which I'm not going to go into too much right now, is this resources piece. This is public resources. Public resources differ from private resources because we do not make really anything you see here available to the public. None of this is available to the public. It's proprietary content. It's licensed to districts. The only thing that we will sometimes make available on our site are some samples, and it's very little bits of what we have available. So this section is only going to give public resources, and same thing, STEM curriculum. These are all public resources, which don't give you the depth of what your district has contracted for. So always use your customer login and go through that way. What you might find interesting under this particular public resource section is information about next generation science standards, some leadership professional development, and things that are more broadly applicable to education in general. And so you may want to look in there, this ebooks about transitioning to next generation science standards, implementation, unit guide, sort of like what does the next generation science standard unit look like. And it's nothing that's really necessary except to say that it may be something, if you really are interested by next generation science standards, that you want to look at. Okay, but again, that's public, it's on this side, and it's a searchable resource base, so you go in and you start to kind of break down by webinar or ebook or what you're looking for. I'd recommend subscribing to our blog. The blog is a great way to kind of keep up to date on monthly articles that we'll put out there from time to time when something comes up related to science education, leadership, education in general, some kind of neat things. And I'd also recommend following us on Twitter and Facebook if you get a chance, because that's another way to know about events that are coming up specifically that you may have an interest in. Quick overview of the Students Reader. So Students Reader is broken down into sections. The sections correspond to lessons. So Section 1 would be Lesson 1 related material. Section 2 is Lesson 2 related material. Section 3, I think you get the point, would be Lesson 3 related material. You can read it all at once if you want. You can read a section at a time. We recommend that you read the entire section before getting into the Socratic dialogue and then that lesson. Okay. Always doing it before. Something you could assign for homework, it's your call. So you can see here, this is a grade 7. We call, at the middle school level, we call the readers lab manuals. They do incorporate some additional elements that are not at the early elementary level and elementary level where we call them readers. Okay. But you see the text features and so on. You'll see that there are oftentimes reviews, some little critical thinking questions, multiple choice questions, and Common Core ELA and math standard activity breakouts. These Common Core ELA and math activities I would describe as basically Common Core standards mixed in with science standards, mixed in with the content specific and relevant to this unit. So a lot of times what we'll do is we will pull something out that will be useful for students if they're going through this unit later on. Not something necessary, but useful and also somewhat enlightening, where they're going to be able to learn an ELA or have application of an ELA standard in the context of science. Okay. You'll also find, depending on the unit, different text features, but every unit you will find specific unit vocabulary. Okay, so basically this is a vocabulary list. We like to call it science words to know, a little more approachable that way. And that links to what you will see in the teacher's unit, so that's what this is here. You'll see lesson progression, overview, objectives down here. Really those are mastery objectives, what we want students to be able to do as a result of this unit. But then how the standards are getting applied and where they are kind of going into, and you see an orange, which would be the disciplinary core idea, and green would be the cross-cutting concept from next generation science standards, really how that performance expectation is being applied in different lessons, okay, and how the practices are being applied in this unit. The practices are being applied everywhere, so we are really explaining that in the context of the unit, where here we can really break out in the context of specific lessons. The practices happen so much throughout that it's would generate so much documentation to have to say in every specific lesson where all these things are occurring. You'll see the vocabulary list. This mirrors exactly what was in that student's reader. This is the background content for teachers, so don't copy it and hand it to the students. It's at an adult's level. What you come to next is the lesson. You'll see the objective, the materials. These are all the materials that are in that package that we looked at earlier. Okay, and that is if you have been in sort of several years of the program, you're not in your implementation year anymore, you're going to be getting only the consumables, and the non-consumables you already have. And again, like I said, if your district is under contract with KnowAtom and you have even non-consumables, like let's say a stopwatch where you've been using it for 5 years and it bites the dust, let us know, and where districts are under contract, we will replace those for you. Depending on the item, we may require you to send it back. But just reach out through the contact us, and we will be able to handle that on a case-by-case basis. You have preparation notes, and then this is where we start to help you get up and running with the discussion. Now, you can see these are Socratic questions that you want to be able to use and jump into. They're not the only questions you can ask, and that's really important to keep that in mind. You may think of other questions. And the reason you have these jumping off points is students are then going to give you something back, which you need to use the Socratic process to then reflect back with them, insert some information, build off other students, and so it becomes a very dynamic process very quickly. So it's not something that can be scripted. Okay, it doesn't follow that traditional model of I'll tell you and you tell me the same thing, and now we know we all understand each other. It's not that kind of a model. You'll see these are examples of visuals. So this is see how it says rock cycle visual, and it's referenced here. That's available on the interactive. So you have to go on there to get it. All right. So back to KnowAtom.com, click the green button, log in, click your grade level, click the lesson, and there you go. Got it up and going. Okay. And then you can see there's all these questions related to that visual where you can pull, and students can pull, use their skills to pull from that, almost as if it was a text feature, but this time it's a sort of a discussion feature as a visual. As if it's a lab activity, you'll go through, you'll see that there's guidance for how to fully guide. But remember, we want a full release of responsibility. So really, you shouldn't be fully guiding, but we're giving that to you so you can see how that can be done, and then you can really throttle back and shift that responsibility over to the student in the methods we've already discussed in the series. I believe in sessions 2 and 3, we discussed this pretty much at length. But it's here for you in that teacher background. And I'm just taking screenshots. So as you can see, a unit 74 pages, there's a lot there. Then you come to those assessments. And remember, this is all because we are supporting you in delivering effective STEM instruction. Remember that definition of STEM instruction, effective STEM instruction, is not our definition, but it's really the definition that's infused. It came from the National Research Council, so infused throughout this next generation science standards evolution and the standards we have now. And I'll just read it again to try to hit it home here, that effective STEM instruction capitalizes on students' early interest and experiences. It identifies and builds on what they know, so that's the scaffolding, this intentional nurturing process that provides them with experiences to engage them in the practices. So we're not doing it like you see the teacher on the left. It's the students, and it's not doing, it's being. Okay, so the students on the right, being the scientist, being the engineer, engaging those practice skills in the context of science or engineering, and sustaining their interest with the scope and sequence that's in place. Okay, keeping that necessary momentum and authentic context. That's the effective STEM instruction that we want to see. Okay, and we're supported with all of these materials. And why is that? Remember high order thinking and those assessment questions that we had discussed earlier. Okay, that idea that students are not only having to experience effective STEM instruction in the classroom because they deserve effective STEM instruction, but they also deserve, when the assessments come out, to be ready and equipped with having had the experience of being the scientist and engineer on a regular basis, having the experience of applying the practices and mastering those along with mastering the processes to be able to function highly in the next generation test environment and really in life. Because again, our goal here is not to create excellent test takers, but to create excellent citizens who are equipped with the knowledge of science and engineering from a content perspective, but also the skills to be able to develop and use that content in context, whether it's a novel context or not. Okay, and that's how we get there. I'll leave you with this, that it's very important as you go forward with implementation throughout your year and from year to year that you maintain closed loop communication. And what that means is that as a teacher that you don't isolate yourself. You don't isolate yourself from your supporters, and your supporters are your parents and also your administrators, but also the students. That it's important that your supporters and your students understand what you value, what it is that is the objective here, that you're not trying to create great test takers, but that you're putting them in the role of scientists and engineers. And that this is a next generation model of instruction, and that these are performance expectations. And that's the key. It's really about expectations. So it's important that you as an educator or as an administrator connect yourself to the student and clearly articulating your expectations, but also to your supporters, okay, to your parents, to your teachers, to your wraparound services. Okay, extended day programs. There's no reason that the after-school science club can't use the same practices and processes you are and leverage the language that you're using and even the definitions, so that that way there your after-school programs become an extension of your classroom, reinforcing the teaching and learning that happens during the day. So from a teacher's perspective. From an administrator's perspective, it's important that you're championing the vision and the goals and giving the permission to take the risks in implementation, and the risks being to let go of a traditional model of content delivery by lecture and reading textbooks and demonstrating, and to really allow the students to engage in the content, to develop the practices, and to develop and use the content with the practices. Okay? Back the teachers up with other supporters, those folks after school, the parents. Okay? Help them understand how you want to grade all of this and make it work. And then from the student's perspective, help them understand what they're involved in, because they will be incredibly excited to understand they're being scientists and engineers. And that's really, you can't get through this program without doing it, but if you do, it's a shame, because really this is an opportunity for students to be scientists and engineers, engage their thinking, and to have them in this closed loop being supported by you as the educator and by all of these outsiders, so you in the classroom, but all these other folks who, if they're on board, will really take their learning deeper, deeper, and deeper. Okay? And so that's what we call closed loop communication. Now, you may say, is there such thing as open loop communication? There is, and that's basically when you break one of these connections. And that's unfortunate, because that's where frustration builds and people become isolated and programs become less effective. The more broken or more open the loop of communication becomes. Anyhow, thank you very much for your time. We have gone a little bit over. I will give you my information. Again, this was session 4 out of a 4-part professional development series, really aimed at not only an overview of the curriculum, but the implementation of the curriculum in a first year or early in an individual's experience. A lot of what you've seen modeled here is from grades 4 and up. If you have specific questions below grade 4, specifically for grade 1 and 2, again, feel free to reach out. The practices, the processes, the construction of binders and communication, testing models, all of this is consistent. Even at the early grades, it's just at a more grade appropriate level. Grade 3 and below have not full-blown lab notebooks where students are creating the entire plan on their own, but really more of a facilitated lab notebook where they're going to be responsible for creating specific sections. And with that, I will leave you, and please send me your questions if you have any. Click through our website, contact us, reach out by email, fvision@knowatom.com. I wish you the best, and thank you again for joining us. Take care.